We're live. Here we are, episode 5. We have a name.
We're live from
The Goldilocks Zone.
We finally decided on a name.
And let's talk about why we chose the Goldilocks Zone.
Yeah.
Tell me the story.
I feel like we should also talk a little bit about some of the runner-ups that were in contention. But the reason we landed on the Goldilocks Zone, which was something that you called attention to as a great name. So thank you, Brett, for that.
Thank you.
As soon as you said that, I was like,
that's it.
This is so, like, you almost feel dumb because it felt so obvious.
It was obvious.
Yeah. Like, why didn't we just start with this? Sometimes the best answers are the simplest answers.
Good.
But because we wanted something, to do with Goldilocks, but that also left some room so that we could talk about like personal things and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So the name Goldilocks came to be for the business side of things, Goldilocks Goods, for many reasons. But one of the coolest things that really solidified the name was when I found out that scientists refer to the location of the Earth in our solar system as the Goldilocks zone.
Because it's the perfect place to foster life.
It is not too hot. It is not too cold. It is just right. So we are not too close. We're not too far from the sun specifically.
Right.
So it's the perfect place to foster life so that we can have water, that we can have like all these different things. I was actually reading a little bit more about an article recently that got a little more in depth. And I think, any scientists on here, feel free to call me out on this because I am not, but I thought it was really interesting. It was talking specifically to do with water where it's not evaporating, but it's also not frozen all the time. So we kind of have that like perfect temperature middle ground where we have easy access to water for the most part. So I thought that was really cool.
Water's everything.
Exactly.
Yeah. And you didn't tell me that this was part of the name until like 18 months of us working together. I was like, Amy's got blonde golden locks. She likes fairy tales like Goldilocks. The wraps, like not too hot, not too cold, beeswax makes sense. And then you told me this one and I was like, why aren't we talking about this more?
Like you and everybody else that has ever met me generally makes that assumption about the name. They're just like, yeah, you're Goldilocks. And it's depending on the day and the amount of time. At markets, it would always be fun to have like longer conversations and sometimes go into like more detail. But yeah, I don't know how that story didn't come up sooner with you.
Yeah. So, well, I don't think you knew it right off the hop. You found out at some point and then you just kind of forgot to tell me.
It was one of those things where like I think I was pretty close or I might have even already decided on Goldilocks about the whole, still the not too hot, not too cold, but more with like your personal lifestyle balance. And because I was really overwhelmed when I tried to become more environmentally conscious and more eco-friendly, like I'm a bit of a perfectionist. So trying to do that really was a stressful experience and had to kind of rein it in a little bit and find that like happy middle ground. So that was really like where it started. And then hearing the story about the Goldilocks zone was, I think, what either like just like locked it in and was like another layer that I was really excited about. So that name was already like in the running.
Yeah.
And just solidified everything for me.
Totally. I get that. I also understand too, when you kind of you go down the rabbit hole of something that like I went vegan for a year and it didn't really work out for my health. I don't think there's anything wrong with the vegan diet. I just think there's a way to do it right and there's a way to do it wrong. And I was doing it wrong and it didn't align with my lifestyle to do it right. But I went down that rabbit hole of education of like our food systems. How does everything work? How can I be better at this? And it's so scary and overwhelming when you start to peek behind the curtain and you're like, how do I get my carbon footprint in alignment with my ethics of how I feel about animal agriculture? And it kind of fried my brain. I got to the point where I was just like, holy shit, I feel like I can do this better. But the more I learn, the more anxious I'm getting about like every choice I have to make, to the point where I'd go to the grocery store and I would just like stand and stare at stuff and feel so like incapacitated to make decisions.
I feel like I had the same I actually still to this day find going to the grocery store like super overwhelming.
I hate it. Yeah.
I've gotten better at it, but in the beginning specifically, because I was trying to focus on plastic as well. And as you can imagine, going to the grocery store and trying to avoid plastic, and also just in the early days, like realizing there are entire aisles in the grocery store that you can't shop
Everything
in if
has
you are
plastic.
trying to be
Yeah.
really strict about not consuming or using plastic in your life. And you just don't realize how prevalent it is, and you kind of just stand at the edge and look down, and it's just this like mind-boggling explosion of that's in plastic, this is in plastic, like, oh my goodness, what are we doing? And then you can spiral really quickly. I have like almost been in tears in grocery stores. I was probably overwhelmed to begin with like other things in my life per se, but that would sometimes be the tipping point,
right,
of going in, and then you're trying to make a decision and feeling like just like you have no choices, or that, like, I think we're a lot better now. There's a lot more
options,
choices and options than when I kind of first started out, and I think that's huge. There's a lot of really awesome resources. But yeah, I feel like we've probably had very similar experiences in grocery stores, but for similar but slightly different reasons.
Yeah, and going through the vegan experience and then coming back from it, being easier on myself and finding more, a diet that worked better for myself, and understanding a little bit more like what's within my power and what's not, and to try and let go of some things. That actually helped me when we met and I started to think more about my plastic consumption. I was like, all right, I've kind of been through this process. I'm not going to try and just go zero plastic, because I know that's not realistic in my life, and I don't have the mental capacity or time to really do that. But the goal is like incrementally implement these little corrections that over time become something big, but not to like shock myself again with just like, all right, I'm done, just like cutting the cord here. So that's what we recommend to everybody else too. Start small. And that is built into the ethos and the philosophy of Goldilocks, to just start with one thing that can make a little bit of a shift. And then a couple months later or a few weeks later, when you're ready, another one, get the habit, and then just keep going down the road, and do not be too hard on yourself.
Yeah. And just build on what you've already got. Yeah. I think that's a big thing, because people will often say, especially now, there's a lot more awareness as a whole, I think, about, climate change and all of those kinds of things. It's very prevalent. Yeah. Well, what's the point of me doing something as an individual? There's these oil companies, there are these massive corporations, me not using plastic anymore is pointless, right? Yeah. It feels very like fruitless of an endeavor. And I feel like my thoughts on that are that if you are at least attempting to implement something in your life or becoming more aware, whether that's, doesn't have to be beeswax wraps, it's just that in a lot of the experiences that I've had with customers, oftentimes that can be their first touch point, which is really amazing, to kind of opening their eyes to the fact that this is such an issue in the world that we live in, and just becoming more aware. And maybe the beeswax wraps are like the only thing that they implement, or maybe somebody else implements something else, like a reusable cup. It's like such a common thing. But I genuinely feel that if you have like a firsthand personal experience with something that you've tried to do, and you've struggled through the similar things like what we're talking about, you're also, I think, going to be more likely to also advocate for change at like a policy level.
Right.
So either who you're voting for, or if you're actually getting more involved and taking it to that next level of, signing petitions, or going out and, picketing or lobbying, getting involved with volunteer groups. As humans, we tend to not really care about things if we don't feel like it's affecting our lives.
Right.
So it's a really good, in my opinion, excuse to say, oh, there's no point.
Yeah.
I have no power.
Yeah,
I can't do
a
anything.
cop out, because they don't have to do anything too, right?
Exactly.
When it's just really good to focus on what is actually within your circle of control.
Yeah, and so if you even didn't
reach, what can you do?
Even if you didn't want to implement your day-to-day changes, but you want to volunteer with an organization, that's doing good for the planet and climate change.
Right.
That's also huge. That's great. That's amazing. I've just, in my own experience, that's all I can kind of speak from, is that people seem to be more likely to do those things if they've taken those smaller steps to begin with, because it feels like a more personal attack when you realize that these like big corporations are doing these things and taking advantage of everything. And so, yeah, not that we've lost sight of that in any way, shape, or form. We know that this is just the first step.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So back to the podcast name as well, just to come full circle for
Goldilocks Zone.
Real quick moment here while we're in the Goldilocks Zone. Let's explain some of the runners up.
Okay. So my first thought was Maker to a Million. And that came out of thinking about how many people there are out there, like yourself, like 2017 Amy, who have created their own product, or they're making jewelry, or, you know, whatever it is. And they're at the market and they're kind of, you know, running through those cycles of make stuff, sell it, make stuff, sell it, make stuff, sell it. And maybe there's that point where they're like, I want to hire people. I want to grow this into business. I have no idea how to do this. And that's our roadmap that we've taken, and how to take that and hopefully grow it to $1 million revenue company. You know, so Maker to a Million. We weren't crazy about that. It was like, I don't know, the million in there, you know, it's so subjective, like $1 million in revenue. It doesn't really tell the full story. So that one was kind of around for a bit. And then you had another one.
Yeah. And I think we also didn't want to come off as like salesy, you know? I don't know. As soon as you throw like sometimes dollar values and things, sometimes people get weird vibes. Like you're a, you know, sneaky.
And we'll talk about how we got to $1 million in revenue.
Exactly. And I think we're still going to talk about that entire journey. That is really, you know, and beyond. So
totally
going from a maker to $1 million in revenue plus, right? And that entire journey. So maybe we'll incorporate it in the tagline. We haven't got a tagline yet, so we'll work on that. But like, you know, just to explain that is still the journey that we're really talking about, and kind of going from there. And then why am I blanking right now on the other one? From A to B. That was the one I was voting for a while.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be a great one because it was how to get from point A to point B, kind of similar to Maker to Million,
right?
In that sense, where it was like, how did we get from these early stages of me working on my own to, you know, a business, and like incorporating and having all these sales and staff and that whole journey. And my name is Amy and your name is Brett. So from A to B, there's still a part of me that really loves that title still.
For sure. It's great.
But we did do some research and there was another name that kind of already had that. I mean, we probably still could have taken it anyways, but the Goldilocks Zone was just a nice way to tie in Goldilocks as well.
And for marketing purposes too, as this is a small business podcast, SEO, when you're marketing your podcast to get it out there, and we're leveraging our business, Goldilocks Goods, it makes a ton of sense to have that in the name, just to expand our reach and have ease of people finding us too, and the assimilation of like, oh, like
people understanding that this is who
Goldilocks
we are.
Goldilocks Goods, like it's easier to connect the link than from A to B, and we're just a couple people that are, they don't know who we are maybe until like they, you know, find our website or something like that. So easier link and easier to market that way. So that's what we went with. Yeah.
There was a couple other ones I think people had suggested, and there were some really good ones. I can't think of what they were right now, but
were they that good?
So maybe they weren't that good because maybe they weren't that memorable. But yeah, as soon as you had messaged with what about the Goldilocks Zone? And I was like, yeah, it's perfect. We're doing it.
Well, let's get into the meat of why we're talking today.
It's a big one.
Big one. The pandemic episode.
Is there anything bigger at this point in recent events than the pandemic?
No.
I don't
think so. Holy shit. Like, what a crazy... This is 2.5 years out now. And like, we're still kind of in it. There's still all these rules. Everybody listening to this knows, like, depending on where you live. And looking back on what happened leading up to the pandemic, and then what happened throughout the pandemic year, we might have to do multiple podcasts on this. But it was a wild ride.
It's also like, I feel I don't want to say like apocalyptic because I don't mean it in the same kind of catastrophic way, but there is this sort of line in the sand, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic.
Right.
And everybody knows, you know, and
where is that line though? I know people are like
post-pandemic. I feel like pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic.
So pre, I guess. We're not really post. I don't know.
People say post-pandemic.
I know.
And you're like, is it?
We're not really there yet. But I caught myself saying something today and said, oh yeah. That was pre-pandemic. And it was just this weird, everybody knows what that means. Everybody, like, without actually having to kind of express those feelings. It was just such a weird sensation. I caught myself saying it and I felt kind of, I don't know how I felt. It was weird.
I know. Yeah. Like life was different. Life was simpler. Yeah. I don't think it was. I think everybody was equally as stressed out with work and jobs and stuff. And the pandemic, I don't even remember how I felt before the pandemic. It's been 2.5 years. So it's like, how did I operate? What was my anxiety or stress levels then? I know they were still, I was anxious and stressed about other shit.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of stuff came on, but other stresses got taken away too, of just like, oh, I don't have to go to social events anymore. Not that I don't like social events, but like the pressure of being like having to go to some things.
Yeah.
That's gone. So there was some nice things. But anyways, I digress back to the story of going into the pandemic. Because for us, the pandemic, I would say the strangeness of the pandemic probably started somewhere in January or February of 2020.
So I was in Australia.
You were that's right.
Visiting one of our mutual friends, Curtis.
Yeah.
Hi, Curtis.
Yeah.
Hi, Curtis's mom. We love you. And there were rumblings, but nothing that would have even remotely phased me to not travel, to not get on a plane, to not go somewhere.
Yeah, you hear it all the time.
Yeah, you hear about stuff in other countries,
and it was outbreaks, and then
very much still very, very distant at that time, especially being in Australia too. What was taking precedence in the news was also all of the forest fires that were going on that year.
Right.
That was like, I think, I can't remember the statistics, but an insane amount of Australia was just burnt to a crisp. So that was sort of the dominating narrative while I was there. And then I came back. And I think that sometime between February was when it kind of started to maybe make more like mainstream news from what I can recall. We had friends that were also in the States that kind of early March, it was getting to a point where I remembered thinking, do we need to call them to tell them that they should come home? It started to feel very, like what is happening?
Yeah.
Much more prevalent. But it wasn't until mid-March that everything hit. And I remember this because I had a roommate and she moved out like 2 days before everything shut down. Like before, I would say like the pandemic, quote unquote, sort of hit Victoria in that sense, where we had made a decision. You and I had a phone call.
Yeah.
So that's a timeline so people kind of understand. We were, business as usual, bunch of staff in the studio coming into work every day. And I remember having a phone call with you and we were talking about what we should do. Nothing was mandated yet. Like mandates weren't, I don't even think, a word at this point. And I think if I recall correctly, we actually just decided to close the studio. We didn't really have a set time, but just for a little bit until the world kind of figured, like the world and everybody, like us included, kind of had more information about what was actually happening. Because it felt very much like no one really knew what was going on.
I'll dial it back a little bit further than that.
Okay.
Because there was shit that happened leading up to that. So you were in Australia. Whit and I went to Mexico. We got back at the end of January.
Mexico, yes.
So we get back early February. And what was going on in the business internally at that time is we had 2 big wholesale contracts. So we were whipping up a bunch of wraps for Indigo and a bunch of wraps for HomeSense.
Right.
And we're cranking production. Not only were we cranking production, but most of our production staff had given us notice because they were all going tree planting April 1st. So we had we can call it the old team, or the team that's going out, that had been with us for a year and a half. And they were transitioning out, which was awesome. It was great group of people. But then we were also bringing in new people, and there was this overlap. So we're training a bunch of new people. And in the studio in February, I remember it just being chaos because there were like 14 people in here.
It was probably the most staff I think we've ever had in here at any given time, which is also interesting to think about, considering everything we've just gone through in the last kind of year and a half, making items for the Jilly box, which is actually the biggest order that we've ever had. It was 15,000 units, way more wraps than what we were making for these orders. But we hadn't got the efficiency dialed in. We were still learning, so this at that time was probably the biggest order we'd had at that point to date.
Totally.
And therefore the most staff we also had as well.
Yeah. I just remember the number 14 and being like, if you're coming into the studio and being like, this is too much. Like there is a point where you have too many people and efficiency completely breaks down without proper systems.
It's the classic too many cooks in a kitchen issue. And we're also a small space. We don't have a lot of space either. So it is very much that analogy, I think.
Yeah. And it was like, well, we have to have the old team train the new team. So there's this nice smooth transition,
Mhm.
and that it's not like this, complete disaster when we hit April 1st. And again, we didn't know about the pandemic at this point. So all of that is happening. We're moving through February. And then I think this is another important thing too, is on March 1st, we lost our production manager.
Mhm.
Right. So for, just various reasons, it just wasn't a great fit anymore. And, we kind of parted ways and moved on. So March 1st, this is 2 weeks before the pandemic.
Yeah, obviously we had no idea this was coming.
Right. And so, yeah, it's such like, it was like there was something in the air.
Yeah.
There was chaos happening. And I remember just feeling like something feels so out of balance. And yes, we heard like little rumblings of, oh, COVID, and like it might be coming, it might be in North America. But again, you're just like, well, this has never happened in our lifetime. A big pandemic didn't, I think, even happen in our parents' lifetime. I think the last one was a Spanish flu, right? So
yeah,
it was
and
like,
you would hear about it, and I think,
and you hear all kinds of shit on the news.
well, you
that
hear
never
about
happens.
it, and you think worst case scenario, and this went on even once the pandemic was actually a bit more of a real thing, was, oh, it'll just be a couple, like it's only gonna be a couple weeks, like
Well, that's
it's
what
not,
everybody's telling us as well.
yeah, and
Yeah.
you don't think it's gonna be what it turned into either, right?
Here's when I knew it wasn't going to be a couple weeks.
Yeah.
This was my holy fuck moment. I'm a big fan of the Toronto Maple Leafs. I follow the NHL pretty religiously, and it was March. I think it was March 15th or March 16th. Like the NFL shut down, the NBA shut down, the NHL shut down, and I remember calling my buddies back home and being like, "The world's ending." And they were like, yeah, this is insane. These are multi-billion-dollar organizations. And it just grinded to a halt. And it's like, that's how many people live their lives around professional sports, and how much money is circling around that world. I know that might be like kind of a ridiculous indicator, but I knew at that moment, I'm like, they're not just going to have to pause this for 2 weeks, like stopping that machine.
Yeah, they're not going to
restarting it.
Turn off that money faucet for no
right. So I was like,
reason.
Holy shit, this is serious. And then I think it was, and then yeah, it was like right around like 15th, 16th, 17th was like the holy shit week. I think the 15th was a Monday, the 17th was a Wednesday.
Yeah.
Because I remember finally on the 17th, there was maybe, I think half the staff was like, oh, we're going to stay home, but a few people were coming in. I think like Phoebes and Kev and Hines were in. And we were all kind of looking at each other, and we're listening to CBC, and we're listening to Trudeau and the health minister. And there was like, this could be a 4 to 10% death rate. And we're all like kind of sideways eye looking at each other. And I just go, I think you guys should go home. And they're like, good call, we're out of here. And everybody just bounced. And I remember going home and just kind of like started watching those Trudeau morning news.
How did I forget about those? I feel like
They're
like
intense.
I'm scarred from them, and I've just pushed them from my memory, and I forgot that was even a thing.
We urge you to stay home. Yeah. If you have to go outside, don't.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about going to work, don't. It was just like, what is this guy saying? Like, he's just telling everybody to do nothing. And it was like, what are the implications of this in the world? And then what are the implications of this in our business? So then we start getting those emails,
phone calls. How long after that was it that? So the biggest, I think there was like a bit of like maybe a couple days, maybe a week. I don't know. That's the funny thing about the pandemic, right? I don't really remember timelines anymore because it all kind of starts to blend together. But I remember
it's within a week, all this stuff kind of happening.
I remember you and I having a conversation. We called it, like, I called you, you called me, whatever. Because I could work from home with everything that I do for the most part. You could still keep up with some stuff. And you and Whit were actually coming to the studio, just the two of you, because you already were living together. So at one point, it was just like the two of you kind of rocking production and shipping. So we were lucky in that sense that we were able, and you live nearby. So you were able to like come in and kind of keep things moving a little bit if there were any orders that were coming through at one point. I think that might have been a bit later on, but I do remember having, because I don't know why I remember this aspect of it so vividly. I remember parts of the conversation, but I remember lying on my floor in the sun on one of my meditation pillows. Like, I remember exactly how I was sitting when we had this conversation. And it being kind of a strange conversation in the sense that we were both, I think we maybe realized this was going to go on for a bit longer. It wasn't just like a week. I think we were talking about, having to have conversations with our staff about, not coming back in at all before they leave to go tree planting if they're able to leave at all.
Yeah.
So this is like sometime, later on in March, and kind of just feeling a weird sense of calmness when it felt like so much of the narrative of what we were hearing from either friends or family or other business people was very frantic and very chaotic, which is not to say that we did not experience those feelings.
Yeah.
But I feel like you and I have always been able to have really good conversations where we were like, this already felt like a transitionary period for us to begin with.
Right.
So let's just take advantage of the things that we had already planned to put in place, and it just might look different.
Yeah.
Is that the gist of what you remember?
Kind of. I remember feeling relieved too. And I think it was just, you know, with losing our production manager on March 1st, the 14 people, feeling chaos, the big turnover, it was so chaotic that when this hit and I sent everyone home and then the government was like, stay home, I remember just being like, oh, thank God.
It gave
for
us
a little bit being like, this might be the end of our business, but I could just like, you know, and there's all this underlying stress of like, what's happening in the world? How many people are going to die? You know, are we safe from this virus? Is it going to just start like, are people going to start dropping like flies in the street? There was that going on, but that seemed a little too crazy to comprehend. It was like this pause that we could get.
a regroup.
But that only lasted for a couple days.
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, we might actually run out of money, and the government hasn't talked about like bailing anybody out yet. And you're just like, they're telling you not to work, but you have to work to make money. So.
And then that's when I remember after having that conversation, getting those emails from, you know, Indigo and HomeSense. And
so let's talk about the numbers behind that.
Wholesale orders. And I remember this too, that one of the orders was scheduled to be picked up that day.
Yeah.
And that day we had arranged everything. It was getting picked up to go to whatever warehouse. And that was the day we got the call that was just like, this order's canceled.
That was Indigo.
Yeah.
Indigo was done. It was a $40,000 purchase order that we had already put all of our work in. We didn't get a deposit.
Yeah, no deposit.
Probably should have.
All the labor, all of the, like, you know,
cost
fabric, all
everything done.
the beeswax, all that. Like, this was done, ready, go out the door. All of the costs that were incurred from that purchase order were on us.
Right.
Like,
and and when you're talking about wholesale, the way that our cost of goods is probably like somewhere in the ballpark of like $15,000 to $20,000 had been invested, and that $40,000 that comes back, the profit goes to pay people, and like it's not just going in our bank account, it's like going to run the business, going to advertising. So all of a sudden you're like, okay, there's 40 grand. And I remember talking to the person at Indigo and being like, are you allowed to do this? And they were like, this is unprecedented. It's a pandemic. Like all of our stores are closing down. Like, what do you want us to do? And I was like, good point. Like, I don't know what's going on either. Can you sue someone during like then all the laws changed and like shit got crazy for a bit. And then we had a $20,000 PO with HomeSense that was 75% of the way done. And I just remember thinking like, we got to get to this delivery date. It was like, I think a week ahead. So maybe like March 22nd or something, HomeSense was going out. And I'm like, I think they're going to pull it. And sure enough, they pull the PO. Same thing. We're out. We can't do this. We're closing all our stores. So $60,000 of revenue that we thought was coming in is no longer coming in. And we had purchased all of our fabric from the year that we pay for in US dollars, but we're on like a net 90 payment term with them. So you would have purchased it in early January.
Like, it takes a long, it would have been early January, maybe even earlier, because when it's custom too, we start working on things much, much earlier. At least 4 to 6 months in advance. So it might have
even been December when we started the process, November, December, but we were due to pay the bill on April 1st. And this might not sound that crazy, but the crazy part is like, sure, we're out the 60 grand from the other two POs, but the Canadian dollar, if anybody was watching the currency exchange during that time, I believe, I don't have the exact numbers, but I believe the Canadian dollar was $1.20 against the US dollar. And in that 2-week time frame of like maybe early March, it started to slide quite a bit as like the whole stock market was crashing. But let's just say from March 1st to April 1st, the dollar moved from $1.20 to $1.50. And it was a $50,000 fabric bill. So now the fabric bill is $70,000 Canadian.
Yeah,
so
it doesn't seem like that much when you're talking in, a couple cents
Well,
here
it's
and there.
25 cents.
Well, but like you think, but that's what I mean. Like you hear 25 cents, and you go, well, that's not.
Yeah,
like,
multiply
it
by
is what
50
it is. But then all of a sudden,
yeah.
holy shit.
Yeah. So we're going. So now I'm looking at stuff. It's like kind of, you know, March 23rd, March 22nd. Everybody's gone. We don't have anybody working. Maybe Whit and I are fulfilling some orders. We'll get to the marketing piece too.
I was just going to
the
say,
saving grace
yeah.
that really turned the ship around for us. But I'm looking at our financials being like $40,000 loss. I don't think Indo was coming back. Like, who knows? They just killed the PO. 20,000 from HomeSense, that's gone. So now we're at 60. $20,000 foreign exchange currency loss, 80 grand in like, it felt like 2 weeks. And it was just like, we just lost $80,000.
And in that time frame, we had also parted ways with who we were working with previously as a marketing agency.
Right.
And we're in a bit of a limbo before we had, I think, a set date sometime in March.
Yeah.
To start working with this new marketing agency.
March 28th. I remember the date as well.
The date.
That's what's so crazy about this whole time period. It was all within 2
weeks. All of this happened in 2 weeks. And so that's also scary because anyone who has ever started working with any kind of advertising agency, it's
coin flip.
It's always, a very risky endeavor. There's a lot of money involved kind of up front.
Mm-hmm.
There's often a lot of promises made, as part of the sort of sales
right.
tactic. And whether people can deliver or not is often up in the air at that point in time. Are you going to be able to make the money back that I'm about to be paying you up front and all of those kinds of things? And let's just throw in the fact that the world just collapsed and we don't know if anybody's going to be buying anything because nobody's working. Yeah. Nobody's leaving their house at this point.
Right.
So this was terrifying to start the onboarding process. I still remember that first call.
Are we going to do this?
Yeah. And yeah, that was the beginning of the call was like, it ended up being a team of guys that we were working with. We were like, guys, can we sell things?
Yeah.
Like, do we do this? Do we need to just cut ties and say, you know what, this again is unprecedented. I feel like everybody hates that word. We need to find like a new one for it, but sure. We'll look up some synonyms if we do a part 2. But just being like, what are we going to do? But we had also just lost 50% of our revenue stream, which was wholesale. So aside from these like really big orders that were canceled, I think at that point, if I remember correctly, the way that the business was split was about half and half, with half of stuff going to retailers, which was what we would call
2019,
wholesale.
we were about 50-50.
Yeah. And then the other half being direct sales to customers. So aside from being about $80,000 in the hole, we also just lost moving forward half of our revenue stream.
Right.
So if we don't work with this marketing company,
we're dead.
That's the other half of our marketing revenue or our income.
There was no choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they seemed
optimistic.
Still love all those guys. They're great group of people. Hi, Jer. We love you. We miss you.
Aaron was a legend.
Yeah, they were all great. And they seemed very optimistic, but also very logical. Seemed very like level-headed about the fact that, you know what, let's look at this challenge as an opportunity and take note of the fact that what does everybody do when they're sitting at home and they're not working all day is you have probably your big screen on while you're scrolling on your little screen, right? You're like watching TV while you scroll online. And that was kind of the heyday at that point of like Facebook and Instagram advertising.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't know that was the heyday.
We were doing all right. We were doing some testing in 2019 and it was going okay. And we were like, oh, this is actually scaling nicely, like at a comfortable rate. You know, we're putting in $1, maybe we're getting like $1.75 back. So we were like, we can kind of creep away at this. And sometimes we were getting $2 back and it was like, okay, this feels all right. But it was our own money too.
Yeah.
Right. Which is another really unique thing about the deal with Straw House that we did. And so when we pushed with these guys, I remember them being like, here's how it's going to work. You guys need to do some testing with us. We're going to do phase 1 testing, $5,000. You got to put that money up. We'll analyze the results. Then we'll move into phase 2, another $5,000. And then if everything's good to go by phase 2, then we're going to move into our revenue share agreement. And this is something we realized was completely unique. Most marketing agencies would never touch this.
I don't actually think I've met anybody since then.
Yeah. Revenue, maybe not revenue shares. Revenue shares can be common. That's like performance marketing, right? Where like, you know, a company, they take a percentage of all sales that they bring in through their marketing channels. And that's common. But what was really unique with these guys is they were kind of at this time more of like an investment fund style. where they would put up their own capital and just do a 50-50 revenue split with you, which seemed really weird for us at the time. We really had to get our mind around the numbers and build out some spreadsheets. But by the time we looked at it, we were like, okay, this could really work. And the benefit is if we can scale really high and really quickly, they have credit cards with like unlimited amounts because they're doing this for multiple brands.
And at that point too, there's really no risk for us, which was a big thing.
It took all the risk away, which was kind of a bit of a crazy deal.
Going into the pandemic.
Yeah.
Where we felt very unsure of what was going to be happening, and to kind of go, you know what, we don't really feel like we have a choice. And really, what's the downside of not proceeding with these guys? Because they're putting their money up front. Most performance-based agreements kind of have a retainer component where you pay a monthly fee regardless. Right. And then there's a small percentage, based on the profit or revenue that they generate, usually like 5 to 15% or something like that. Right. So the reason that it was a 50-50 split was because they were taking on all of that risk. Right. Yeah, and exactly. There was a lot of numbers conversations, a lot of back and forth through. Like, I think we worked with them for just over a year.
About a year. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then we went through that whole process. They basically vet to see, is this something that we actually think that we can do? Mm-hmm. Because they're on the hook for money if they end up working with a business that they don't actually feel like they can generate income for. Right. So they really want to make sure that they're doing their due diligence, and which is also great because that's good for us too. Like, I don't want to work with a company if you don't think that you can make us money either. Right. At the end of the day, that's actually a really great structure that they have. It's had to change because of iOS update and tracking and a bunch of different things, but we'll get into that. We should just have a whole iOS update conversation one day, because that's a whole thing as well. Just throw that in at the end of a pandemic to make small business life more difficult. But anyways, I digress. So we went through that whole process with them. They started getting ads up and running. I don't remember, like,
phase one. Phase one they completed, and they were like, let's go.
We're in.
They're like, this is amazing. These are great results. We can scale this. We're putting our credit card in the account and we're moving forward. And that was maybe late March, early April, I would say. I know we started with them officially on March 28th. I don't know if we did the testing in like the few days before that, but March 28th in my mind, which is 13 days after March 15th, when like the scary news stories and like all the big businesses started shutting down.
Well, and we were not sure what was going to happen and if we were going to have a business in another month, which is also, I think, what most business, like, I don't know any businesses that didn't go through that experience of really having to look and kind of go, am I going to be able to make it through this?
Right.
And not having a roadmap about what you even need to do to make it through, because it's kind of like wandering around in a bunch of fog.
Totally. This had never happened before.
Yeah. And you didn't know what was going to happen next either. Like, there was no real plan. There was no real outline. It was a lot. It's kind of just everybody figuring it out as you go. That was also potentially the name for one of the podcasts, or for our podcast as well. Was
fuck around and find out.
Fuck around and figure it out. Because we say we'll just figure it out a lot in this business.
So we get to April.
Yeah.
April, they just start pushing up that ad spend. And the unique part about the deal is we basically locked in a guaranteed 2-to-1 return on ad spend. So we would always get $2 back. And then they would take the other half of that, or they would take anything above the $2 return on ad spend. So if they could scale it to a 3 in a really good month, I think there was a month where we paid them, like, I cut them a check for like $18,000 one month.
Yeah, it was a lot.
And they were like, I was like, oh, this kind of hurts. but
they were also crushing it.
They were crushing it, and it was amazing. So I was like, oh no, this is great. It made sense. They made our lives really easy, and we were able to like focus on the internal business. And so I think we did in April, because things really got hot like mid-April.
It's also Earth Day. So Earth Day is,
it's a big one.
One of our, I would say, probably our biggest sales day outside of what we call Blue Friday. We'll get into that another day, but traditionally known as Black Friday. So that would be our biggest sales day of the year outside of that.
Right. So we were promoting Earth Day, and the boys are just scaling it up. And I think by that time, Fiona had like been released from the United States. She scrambled her way back from California. So now we got 3 people in production, and I think we quickly brought back a 4th and started building up the team. And I think April, this number kind of sticks in my head. I think we did $150,000 in April.
It was something stupid,
which was completely unheard of for our
and
company.
and the kicker of this is that we probably wouldn't have been able to make that much product, except that we now had all of the Indigo order kicking around and the HomeSense order just sitting in boxes that I think we ended up having to repackage it because there was something. No, we didn't. I couldn't remember.
It was in the wholesale packaging.
It was, and we just decided to sell it that way.
Yeah, we're like, we're not going to take the time to repackage this.
Right.
It's actually more robust packaging with more information.
Right. There's no downside to it.
No downside, really. And also in our heads, we're just like, we might just use all this packaging because who knows when wholesale stores are going to open back up.
Yeah, when stores are going to get going again. So it was this weird kind of...
And it was gone by the end of April. I remember that. I remember being so stoked that like it was kind of like a fuck you, big retail. And not that it was their fault that they shut down anyways, but there was that part of like, can you guys legally do this to us? Like we're a small business and like you kind of feel like the little guy and like you see how big some of these companies are. And like, yeah, sure, I get you're closing your stores, but you're taking like 40 grand away from a small business and this could be the end of us.
Yeah.
Again, whatever, you know, and the people that I talked to were very nice. I don't think they actually kept working there because when I tried to contact them again a few months later, no one was answering their emails. So they probably had massive layoffs, which is a whole other crazy thing of working for some of these big brick and mortar companies. If something like this happens, like it was Armageddon for them. And I just remember by the time we got to May, that inventory was gone. Direct to customer. Another thing that we did, I forgot about this. This was really cool. So we noticed in that testing that a ton of people started buying from the US. And we had not broken into really the US market. I think in 2019 it was like 5% of our sales.
Very small. Yeah. Compared to what it would look like now.
And we didn't have our shipping logistics figured out, but we saw that movement of people in the US like finding us, and we were able to target them through Facebook and Instagram ads. And so I remember calling you up. This is probably back to early April. And I was like, Amy, how fast can you build a store?
Oh, yeah. I forgot about this too.
Yeah. I was like, how fast can you build a store so we have a US store, a Canadian store? Because I want to divide the traffic and we want to start accepting US dollars because that's how we're going to get our money back on this fabric mill.
Yeah. And that was also at a time when, because we use Shopify for our websites.
Yeah.
Well, now website singular. But at that time, there was like a weird thing where you couldn't accept both Canadian and US through the store. It would like, you could do it where you could display both Canadian and US, but the processing had to be in Canadian. So we had to set up a secondary store so that we could actually receive and process in USD as well.
Otherwise, Shopify will take the US dollars, they'll send you Canadian, but they take about 3% fee. Yeah. So I started seeing that fee too. And I was like, I don't like that because the amount of US dollars that were being transacted on the store, I'm like, this is like thousands of dollars now in this month where, you know, we could take that and we could put it back into marketing. And these little things like 3%, 2% that you see in your business that if it's like a very small amount of money, you're like, you know, it's not enough to do anything. But then when you get to like 10,000, like $150,000 in revenue in a month, you're like, okay, that's $5,000 now that we got to figure out. Like $5,000 a lot of money for a small business.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I whipped up the fastest website in the history of humanity, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was like a work week.
2?
I think it was like you started on Monday and you were done by Thursday.
Yeah, and I remember, I think, was it Jer or one of the guys just also not expecting it to be that fast. But
holy shit, yeah.
It was also, I'm going to drop everything. I'm working from home. You know, I'm going to spend every waking hour getting this done because this is what could potentially save the business. Or like, it's one of those things too when you're a small business, and especially when you're going through something like that is just so crazy and chaotic, and the world and everything, is you want to take sales when you can get them. Yeah. Like you need to be able to, you can't just expect, oh, maybe in 4 months from now we can finish a website and the sales will still be coming in. It's like, if this is happening now, you need to be able to do it now.
Totally.
And like take advantage of that momentum of what is happening in real time, which is a benefit of being a small business. Bigger businesses aren't always able to do that. So there are pros and cons, right?
Totally.
I think we were really good at being able to make those changes and implement them, and I think prioritize. Yeah, this is the thing right now. Yeah, this is the only thing that matters. Okay, guys, I'm gonna knock it out. We're gonna make it happen.
Yeah. We did it.
And then at some point, I know for sure we had to do this in July.
Mhm.
I don't know if this was the first time that we had to send these kinds of messages.
Oh yeah,
We have to be in this position
throwing
again.
up the white flag to
We had to
the
send a
marketing boys.
message to say, guys, can you dial back the ad spend? You're making too many sales.
Yeah.
We can't keep up with production.
So ridiculous.
And that just killed me because it's the same thing. I was like, I want to, if people want the wraps, I want to put them in their hands.
Yeah.
But it was just, we're also still in the middle of a pandemic. We don't want too many people in the space here.
We also just didn't have the equipment for it.
Yeah, we didn't have
that's
the
why
systems.
I bought, we now have our 2 big industrial hot plates that we use,
Mhm.
which came in sometime in the first year of the pandemic. But we got to the point where we started blowing breakers like crazy.
Mhm.
Like we were maxing out the amount of power output that we had at our fingertips in the studio. And it was just back to the same problem in like your 30 amp old, like 1900 apartment building
Yeah.
where we were like trying to operate the business with 2 crock pots and a hot plate on a 30 amp circuit. And it was just constantly blowing breakers.
Even though we're in a commercial building.
Yeah. Commercial building. I think still it's not the greatest commercial building, but we're on a 100 amp circuit and it was still just like nonstop going off. We're just, we'd have to go and get like a new facility, which we looked at.
Yeah.
But we're in Victoria and there's not a ton of great options for what we're looking for. So we're kind of just working with what we had.
Yeah, because and I think the biggest thing with that we found out later, which is why also we've transitioned a lot of the equipment that we use, is that the equipment we were using was not industrial, so it wasn't really designed to A, be on all day, and B, wasn't efficient with the power draw either.
Sure. Yeah.
So when you get more specialized equipment, you're able to reduce the amount of electricity that you require as well. So now we can have way more stuff plugged in without any problems, which is great. We've had to hack a bit of the wiring every once in a while and do some rejigging and labeling so that we, don't blow breakers, but it's totally fine now and we can have them running all the time.
Yeah. And there's these crazy things like financial hacks in business that are tough to see when you do them. But let's just think about, we got the US store going. So now we're collecting the US dollars directly instead of having Shopify convert that. That's several $1,000s a month. Okay, now we can take that several $1,000s a month, go buy some industrial hot plates that are maybe like they're $5,000 for the hot plates, but because they're industrial and they're efficient and they will increase the output by 3-fold. So not only are increasing your efficiency output, but you're decreasing your power draw for the month. You're paying so much less in your hydro bill all of a sudden. So after probably a year, you're like, oh, those paid for themselves just on the hydro bill. Not to mention the efficiency. And like, it's hard to even like really do that calculation, but we have had our spreadsheet going. You could see the efficiency going up and up.
Yeah.
So at the time you're like, woo, $5,000. But then 6 months down the road, you're like, oh, that's kind of like we saved 15 or 20 with the efficiency and the savings and the power bill.
Well, it's a funny analogy that what you're talking about, because I feel like I make that kind of statement about our wraps to a lot of people,
right?
Who will say, wow, these are expensive. I don't know if I can afford them, or, why would I pay this much? And I feel like this is a very common thread within the eco-friendly community and eco-friendly products is they are often more money up front.
Yeah.
But they often will save you so much money in the long run because they're either designed to last for longer, or for example, with our wraps, not like, so they last for over a year, but they also keep your food fresh for longer. So the statistics around how much food waste you're actually saving, I think we did the math in some kind of spreadsheets where I think within the first month that you would make your money back from a set of 3 beeswax wraps with the amount of food that you're not throwing into the trash anymore.
Yeah. If you're someone that has a problem with food waste, which is myself, 100%, like you start throwing away avocados, like half avocados that you're keeping around or you forget about, or cheese.
They're expensive.
You can burn $30-$40 in a month very easily.
Yeah.
And instead of 3 beeswax wraps was $30. So we were like, okay, this is logical for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And maybe for some people it's 3 months, 4 months, 6 months.
Yeah.
But I think the interesting thing with our human brains is that it's really hard to think long term. It's hard to like see, especially with money. We all got our own shit around like money and finances and budgeting, and we want to spend on some things, but we're completely reckless on other things that are in our blind spot. And so it's a very confusing thing to work out for yourself to see like, oh, this roll of plastic wrap, or the amount of people that came by at the markets and they'd be like, I love these, but I'm still working through my Costco roll.
Yeah.
They're like, I bought like a 1,000-meter roll, and I probably got about 600 left. So I'll see you in a couple of years. I'm like,
oh my
all right,
goodness. Yeah, it's
I guess.
the short-term pain for long-term gain is
Yeah.
just something that I think as humans we're not really well designed to overcome.
Totally. Yeah, it's
we can do
challenging.
it. That's why people work out, you know, that same kind of thing. You know, it's uncomfortable, it sucks, like all that kind of stuff, but you feel good after, and
Right.
you know, there's lots
And you're
of
not
things
going to
like
get
that.
results immediately.
Exactly.
Same thing, right?
Yeah.
You got to like go through the pain. It takes you a couple weeks to get in shape.
Yeah.
And then a few months before you see any or feel any real results.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe like a year until you're actually like seeing like, oh, okay, I've like noticed a change in myself.
Yeah.
Right. So everything is a long play. All the things that are worth it in life are long plays.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So we're in July now.
Okay.
Normally we run a plastic-free July sale.
Right.
We did not. It's the only time we haven't done it because we couldn't keep up with production to begin with. So we were like, we can't. We actually we just can't run a sale. Like, we won't be able to keep up with everything. So we I remember slogged through July, not battling, but kind of having a bit of back and forth with Straw House because they make their money when they sell more. I mean, we do as well, right?
Yeah.
But they're like, this is their job. They're doing their job well, and we're essentially telling them to not do their job as well.
They're
and
doing
that
it
sucks.
too well.
Yeah. And so I get it, where they would be like, hey, can we bump it up to this much ad spend today? Because we kind of had a weird formula where we knew if we spent this much that we would get this, like, you know, X number of dollars, like $7,000. I think we were at a point where we were like, can you only spend $7,000 a day in advertising?
Yeah.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And, you know, and we probably could have, I'd love to just, I don't know, live in an alternate universe.
I don't think it was 7. That seems
high. Was it not
high.
7? Was that high?
Because that would be like $200,000 a month. I'm just doing the math on that. 7 times 3.
Maybe it was we would get $7,000 a day in sales or something like that, and then whatever
we were consistently doing $10,000 a day for a while.
Like, so whatever the ad spend would have to be for that.
Yeah, well, 3 to 1, right? Like, I think around that time, like in the heyday, it was 3.5. So yeah, it was $2,500 to $3,000. We're probably our big days.
Hurts my heart thinking about that, and just the state of thinking about the state of advertising right now, and I'm just like, oh, the golden days.
The golden days.
It was such a. Anyways, I digress. But yeah, we were kind of in this place where we had to go back and forth with them, and they'd be trying to be like, guys, can we bump it up to this today? And we'd be like, okay, yeah. And then like 3 days would go by. We'd be like, we've sold out again. We need you to bump it back down. And it was kind of like that, I feel like, for almost all of July.
Mm-hmm. And August and September.
Yeah, I was like, did that just continue indefinitely?
There was maybe a bit of a slowdown in August.
We were always really slow in August.
But it was still crazy. Like, we still had crazy months all the way through. And then our typical November was just absolutely insane.
Yeah, like most product-based small businesses, November, Christmas time, is the biggest season of the year. I hear from some people when I go to shows like Potters, like sometimes make about 90% of their revenue in November.
Whoa.
Like, there's some pretty
makers,
great,
yeah,
for makers and stuff, you know, people who make cards, like, depending on what your products are, obviously depends on the state of your business and what other advertising you're doing, like, year round. Like, if you're only going to Christmas shows, then obviously you're going to make all your revenue there. But these people attend markets all year round, and that's really what they do, is mostly just markets. And the Christmas shows bring in almost exclusively their revenue for the entire year.
That's probably what year one looked, the $50,000 we made in year one.
For sure.
That you made, and then I came in and helped with the Christmas push with our friends. That was probably 80 or 90% was in those like last 2 months.
Yeah. And it's still a pretty big chunk for us. Like, it's not an insignificant amount that we make over kind of the Christmas season. So
and so that year, even for how crazy that year was, we did almost $500,000 in November, which is so insane to say out loud. Because there was a time when Amy and I were working together in 2018, and we were talking to our friends who became shareholders of the business, and they're helping us out with growth and e-commerce strategy. And they said something about $20,000 in a month, and I was like, "Get out of here! Come on,
never gonna happen.
20 grand in a month?" I was like, "Nah." There's a beeswax wraps. Like, you can't sell that many beeswax wraps, and then you're like 450, and you're like, "How did we do that? How did we sell $450,000 of something?" It almost like doesn't make sense looking back, you know.
I remember,
but it happened.
We were into Tofino. I was into Tofino.
Yeah.
I remember, this is so funny because I didn't realize I have such vivid visual memories of certain conversations with you where I don't really remember what you were talking about, but I remember where I was.
Yeah.
I remember being in the back seat of somebody's car.
Okay.
And I think I was away on a trip to Tofino, and it was like leading up to kind of that like Black Friday, Blue Friday timeframe.
Uh-huh.
And I think we had like an 8-day sale planned.
Yeah.
Was that that year? Was that 2020? And I remember having
know.
a conversation with you, and you were like, I think we need to not do it for this long. Like things are too crazy. We can't, same problems, can't keep up with production.
Yeah.
That might have been the year before potentially, but I don't know if that was 2020 maybe.
Yeah. We hit the brakes and like threw up the submission flag to Straw House.
I think that
probably like 4 times.
I think that they had probably, pushed for a longer sale. It makes sense when you're sometimes running ads, if you're doing a specific campaign, you kind of have to, this is what I've learned, like run certain ads for longer periods of time. It's really hard to just put them up for 2 or 3 days and then like pull them. Otherwise it's kind of a waste of money. So I do feel like that feels likely that could have been 2020, probably. That we were doing like an 8-day sale based on, their advice, and they're wanting to get us as many sales as possible too. I just remember getting that phone call with you being like, I think we need to pull the plug on some of this, Yeah, I was
like, this feels excessive and it feels like it's going to break everything. Yeah. I just remember thinking that again, just with our current setup and, again, we'd upgraded our machinery by then, but still, we can't have 20 people in here working, and like, there's only so much you can do with the power output. And that's where we were at.
We made it through.
We made it through
Christmas.
And maybe we should leave off by saying, what goes up must come down.
Yeah, that's a good ending.
And we will segue that into future episodes where, it didn't continue that way.
The party stopped. I think we should do Pandemic Part 2 because it is in a lot of ways
it's still the pandemic
influenced by, that exact what you just said. What goes up must come down.
Yeah. All right. Till next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.